Hello and welcome to Business Basics lesson number 11, introducing a third person. As the title suggests, this time we are going to be looking at a conversation where a third person is introduced to somebody else, two other people, in fact. Simon introduces Sasha and Sally to Alan Burt, who is a consultant who is going to be in the City Busy office for the next month. It's pretty likely that Sasha and Sally are going to have a lot of contact with him over this period of 1 month, and therefore Simon sees fit to formally introduce them. Sasha, Sally, let me introduce you to Alan Burt, Simon said. Alan's going to be working with us for the next 4 weeks on a consultancy basis. Sasha, Sally. This, of course, just means Sasha and Sally. So Simon is calling them over. We imagine that he stood in one place in the room with Alan Burt. Sasha and Sally are sitting at their desks and he calls them over. Sasha, Sally. He could also have just said, Sasha and Sally. Both would be exactly the same. Both would be fine. Sasha, Sally, let me introduce you to Alan Burt, Simon said. Let me introduce you to Alan Burt. This is a pretty common, pretty standard way to introduce a third person. It's pretty polite language use. If he said something like, Sasha, Sally, I just want to introduce you to Alan Burt, it would have meant the same thing, but would have been a little bit more casual. Let me introduce you to Alan Burt is quite polite. He could also have said, allow me to introduce you to Alan Burt, which would have been even more formal, even politer. But this is good enough for this situation. Let me introduce you to Alan Burt. Alan's going to be working with us for the next 4 weeks on a consultancy basis. So here, Simon explains who Alan is, why he's here, and importantly, why this is relevant to Sasha and Sally. So when you introduce a third person, you always want to give some kind of detail about that person. Often in a business situation, it's going to be who they are and what exactly it is that they do. Because if, Simon had just said, oh, Sasha, Sally, I want to introduce you to Alan Burt, and then just left it at that, Sasha and Sally would be like, okay, hi, Alan. So what do you do then? And it would be, a little bit awkward for them to ask that. So much better is for Simon to include that in his introduction of the person. This is Alan Burt, and this is what he does. This is why he is here. And in this case as well, and this is how long he's going to be here for, 4 weeks in this case. Alan's going to be working with us for the next 4 weeks on a consultancy basis. So on a consultancy basis, as a consultant. So this means that Alan is not a full-time employee of City Busy. Rather, he is somebody from outside who has been brought in on a temporary basis for 1 month, for 4 weeks, to do a specific job here, some kind of consultancy. He's probably going to be working with the management team so that they can, find problems with the current system, fix those problems, and just improve the City Busy workflow, as it were. Quite a long time ago, when I was still working in secondary school, we actually had somebody come in on a consultancy basis for exactly the same 1 month. At that school, we had one student who was from overseas, couldn't speak Japanese at all, and many of the teachers at that school were having a hard time knowing how to deal with him. So they brought in somebody on a consultancy basis to be there for 1 month just to give advice to those teachers and to tell them how to deal with this student who was having to learn the language alongside learning all the lesson content in the language. And he was there for 1 month, basically at a desk every day for the teachers to come to and get help from. And of course, he went into the classes, watched the classes, gave them advice, all kinds of things. But importantly, he wasn't hired by the school. He was there on a consultancy basis. And after the 1 month period was up, he disappeared and presumably went on to do some other consultancy basis work at some other school. They shook hands. Nothing really to explain here. I've just kept it in for completeness. Good to meet you, Alan, said Sally. So first off, you're going to notice here that this is quite formal, quite polite language use. Remember, Sally and Alan have never met before. They don't know each other. It would not be appropriate for them to speak to each other in really informal, casual terms. So Sally is being quite polite, quite formal, but still quite friendly. Good to meet you, Alan. It means exactly the same thing as nice to meet you. Nice to meet you always strikes me as being quite dry, quite stiff. It's very much textbook language. We do say nice to meet you, but I would say good to meet you is better. It's more friendly than nice to meet you. Great to meet you would be more casual, probably not so appropriate in this situation. I would say good to meet you has the perfect balance here of not being too stiff and formal, but being very respectful, very polite. Sasha and Sally are part of City Busy's management team, continued Simon. You'll be seeing a lot of them over the next month. So Simon doesn't just say who they are, but rather he gives Alan information about what they do, why they're there, and how they are relevant to Alan. In exactly the same way as Simon gave Sasha and Sally information about Alan. Remember, Simon is the person doing the introducing here. It's Simon's responsibility to introduce both parties to each other properly, i.e., give all the relevant information about both parties to both parties. It's not up to Alan here to ask Sasha and Sally what they do and how they are relevant to him. It is Simon's responsibility to do this. And then Simon finishes with, you'll be seeing a lot of them over the next month. If you'll be seeing a lot of someone in a working context, it means you will be working together with them quite a lot. So of course, this is exactly why Simon sees it as appropriate to formally introduce Sasha and Sally to Alan Burt. It's quite likely that Alan Burt is there on some kind of job related to the management of the company. Since Sasha and Sally are part of the management team, that means they are going to be working quite closely with Alan Burt over the next month, and therefore it is very much worth them getting to know him now so that work goes smoothly later. And there we go. That is the conversation for this lesson. The key point here then is when you introduce someone to someone else, don't just give their name, but also make sure that you give appropriate information about that person to the person who you are introducing them to. And also just pay attention to the level of politeness and formality of the language in this conversation. Because as we talked about a couple of times in other lessons, when you are working with somebody every single day and you're really friendly with that person and you know them really well, as is often going to be the case with co-workers and people from outside who you do regular business with, you will be speaking to them in quite a casual, very friendly, quite an informal way. However, when you meet somebody for the first time, you don't want to speak to them like that right from the word go. Rather, you start off on a much more reserved tone, a much more polite, formal basis. Not too much. You don't have to go crazy with it. You just have to be friendly, but respectful and polite when you speak to them. And you see some great examples of this here in this conversation. As always, go back over the story, over the conversation, make sure that you've understood everything, you've understood the meanings of all the phrases and expressions that we've talked about, as well as how they are being used here in this context. Do the shadowing exercise again. as always, make sure that you perfect the pronunciation of this language. Get your mouth moving so that you can say it smoothly and easily when you actually need to. And I will see you in lesson 12, the final lesson in this first season of Business Basics. And in that final lesson, we are going to be talking about getting fired. Want to get more advanced, bigger, better, more detailed, more comprehensive business English lessons just like this one? Head over to doingenglish.com/membership and join us in Julian Northbrook's League of Extraordinary English Speakers.